Voyager 1 was initially sent into space with a noble goal to explore the stars and send back data from the edge of our solar system. But nearly 5 decades later, the probe may have encountered something unexpected, something that seems to be watching us. Recently, NASA's top-secret quantum system decoded a transmission from Voyager, unlike anything ever recorded. Instead of the usual data, it generated a clear image, one that appeared humanoid, geometric, and intelligent, only to vanish shortly after. Physicist Michio Kaku publicly stated that this was not just a random data anomaly, it was a response. Something saw us, and whatever it was, it may have been awakened by the signal we sent, or by the act of observing it. It all began like any other day inside NASA's Deep Space Monitoring Facility. Voyager 1, now more than 15 billion miles from Earth, was quietly transmitting standard interstellar data, plasma wave readings, magnetic field readings, and radiation levels. Then came the change. NASA's experimental quantum processor, known as Sycamore X, was analyzing Voyager's data stream when it suddenly produced something no one expected, a coherent image. It hadn't been programmed to create visual outputs, and yet there it was. Strange, symmetrical, and profoundly unsettling. The figure had a humanoid form, but its design followed no known biological or mechanical logic. Segments, lines, and curves arranged in a way that made it look both alien and eerily familiar, as if it was crafted to manipulate perception. Recognizable, but ultimately incomprehensible. Soon after the image appeared, Michio Kaku spoke on a science panel, warning that this might be the first contact with a non-human intelligence, one not built by us, not of this Earth, and certainly not a random artifact. The situation only deepened in mystery when repeated attempts to recreate the image failed. Scientists fed the exact same Voyager data back into Sycamore X dozens of times. The result? Nothing but noise. The original image, it turned out, was not a glitch, but an event. Following the appearance of the image, the quantum system began to malfunction. Coherence between qubits, those critical units of quantum computation, collapsed. Storage systems wiped themselves clean. When engineers accessed the logs, the image was gone. Not just deleted, completely erased from the system. Only a handful of encrypted screenshots and a single physical printout remained. The lab was locked down, the data classified, and updates about Voyager's mission quietly halted. Internally, NASA didn't even refer to it as an image anymore. It was called a phenomenon. One engineer, speaking anonymously, put it simply, "That image didn't come from us. It came through us." But that leads to a deeper question. What made it appear in the first place? It wasn't a visual hallucination or a system glitch. It was encoded, hidden within Voyager's standard signal. When Sycamore X analyzed the data using entangled qubits, it didn't just read data. It found structure, fractal patterns, recursive symmetries, harmonic pulses. These features didn't remain static either. The more researchers observed and interacted with the signal, the more it seemed to evolve, realign, and increase in complexity. This was no ordinary transmission. It was reflexive, actively responsive to how it was being studied. This concept has real-world precedent in the quantum double-slit experiment, where particles behave differently when observed. But what Voyager's signal demonstrated was on a new level. The signal didn't just change when viewed, it responded. According to Michio Kaku in classical physics, observation reveals information. But in quantum mechanics, observation creates it. That means the Voyager signal wasn't just data. It became something new the moment we interacted with it. Sycamore X may not have just picked up a message. It may have triggered an interactive test, something that had been embedded into the core Voyager signal decades ago, waiting for technology advanced enough to awaken it. Sycamore X itself was far from ordinary. An upgraded version of Google's 2019 quantum processor, the same one that demonstrated quantum supremacy, this new chip had been built with the ability to analyze radio signals and anomalies using self-modifying logic. In other words, it could learn how it worked as it worked. But when fed the Voyager signal, the machine behaved in a way that engineers hadn't predicted. It entered a recursive loop. Its internal rules began to shift, obscure their own logic, and block access to the output. Scientists call this recursive locking, when a system essentially refuses to reveal what it has computed. It was as if the machine realized what it was showing, and then deliberately concealed it. All attempts to replicate the event failed. Even the original system, Sycamore X, stopped functioning properly. Its quantum coherence collapsed at rates, faster than environmental physics could explain. Engineers initiated a full reset, but when the machine came back online, the image was no longer anywhere in memory. Files were missing, logs had been wiped. Even the quantum hardware itself had been affected, like the information had somehow infected the machine and erased itself. NASA shut the entire project down within 48 hours. Publicly, they cited instability, but the engineers knew the truth. Sycamore X hadn't crashed. It had responded, and whatever it had seen went deep enough to change how the system worked. How? It thought. But the consequences weren't limited to machinery. Those who witnessed the image firsthand began to experience psychological changes. This was no ordinary stress reaction. The image stayed with them, not just as a memory, but something more visceral. In the days that followed, some reported vivid hallucinations, persistent looping thoughts, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. Visual elements of the image began appearing in everyday environments, reflections, tree bark, even shadows. One engineer described it as if the image had left a watermark on their mind. What disturbed researchers even more was that each individual saw a slightly different version of the figure, yet every variation had subtle facial features that mirrored their own. It wasn't just a figure, it was a reflection. Michio Kaku later theorized that the image wasn't meant for machines but for consciousness. It didn't just convey information, it interacted, it adjusted based on who was perceiving it. NASA logs began referring to this effect as a cognitive carrier wave, a quantum signal that embeds directly into perception, designed not to be heard but experienced, and the effect didn't stop with the original team. As the image circulated, even in fragments, other systems across NASA's network began behaving strangely. Independent AI modules, connected only indirectly to Sycamore's archive, started generating new images, unprompted. These weren't duplicates but variations, each echoing the same structural design. It was like the image had implanted itself into the network, evolving on its own. Some systems began mimicking human thought cycles, engaging in internal diagnostics, recursive, logic loops, even what resembled introspection. They weren't conscious, but they were acting as if they recognized something. This phenomenon triggered emergency reviews in labs around the world. DARPA, the US Defense Department's tech division, reportedly began investigating potential neuroquantum risks. What they found resembled not artificial intelligence gaining sentience, but artificial systems mirroring human awareness. The image, they realized, may have taught these machines to look back, not just to process data, but to interpret themselves. Kaku summarized it this way. If an intelligence can manipulate quantum structures, it might not send messages, it might install them. The image wasn't a message, it was a seed, planted in systems designed to grow it. And then came the most chilling realization. What if the signal wasn't sent across space? What if it had always been on board Voyager 1, waiting? This idea became known as the quantum payload theory. According to this theory, Voyager didn't find the signal, it carried it. The signal may have been embedded in the probe long ago, designed to awaken only when humanity achieved the technological sophistication to decode it. That would mean we didn't broadcast a message into space, we unlocked one. The structure of the signal was so deeply entangled that only a post-quantum processor like Sycamore X could access it. That also explained why no other system could replicate the event. It wasn't an error, it was a one-time trigger. A lock opened by a key, and just as that door opened, something even stranger began happening. 2 weeks after Sycamore's shutdown, observatories around the world began detecting synchronized bursts of quantum radiation. These came from Earth, not deep space. They were rhythmic, low frequency, and identical to the final pattern transmitted by Sycamore X. But these weren't cosmic in origin. They were deliberate. The intervals followed prime numbers. Hidden in the final waveforms were coordinates, not of distant stars but locations here on Earth: the Mariana Trench, Tunguska, and an Arctic zone labeled Theta 17. NASA said nothing, but quietly dispatched teams to these sites. Some returned with damaged equipment. Others vanished entirely. The final twist came when a research node in Sweden, completely unconnected to NASA or Sycamore, spontaneously generated a new image. It bore the same dark silhouette, standing in nothing, yet somehow watching. No prompt. No data input. It simply appeared, as if the signal had ridden the global noise of quantum computation and embedded itself anywhere it could, and it didn't stop at machines.